Marie, before I get started, do you want to say something about the West Midlands Fabians and also something about the Devolution Committee?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The West Midlands branch of the Young Fabians was founded quite recently, around 6 months ago, by our chair, Nathan Hodson. Since then, we've hosted a few events with prominent guests, including the West Midlands Mayor candidate, Liam Byrne, and more recently one with Jess Phillips, which was really good. We've also run a blog post series and on the West Midlands, and Nathan and I ran a podcast series on winning seats back in the West Midlands, which you should check out because that's really interesting. And now we've started to host more socials with the easing of lockdowns, so keep your eyes peeled for those, and feel free to feel welcome to attend once. Yeah, just watch this space with those.
Okay, so thanks everyone for coming. I'm Cameron. I'm the co-chair of the Young Fabians Devolution Local Government Policy Network and the vice-chair of the West Midlands Young Fabians. And my day job, I work for one of the largest first sector organisations in Birmingham. So this event is sort of one of the first of our series of sort of Labour in Power, looking at sort of Labour representatives across the UK and local authorities who are in power doing things. And this week we're joined by a great lineup from Birmingham City Council. To sort of set the scene a bit, Birmingham has a young and diverse population. It's got a lot going on. A lot of businesses are coming to the city now, like Gordon Sats, HSBC are moving a lot of operations up here. But also it's one of the, it's the seventh most deprived local authority in England. And there is a 9-year life gap between some of the most deprived communities and some of the most affluent communities in the city. So it's got a lot of great opportunities and challenges in Birmingham, which is the biggest local authority in the country and a leading local authority in the Cooperative Councils Innovation Network. So it's a great opportunity to listen to Labour representatives on the front line, leading change in their communities from the Birmingham Charter of Social Responsibility, ensuring sort of employers pay a fair wage and that there's boosting the economy and sort of transparency in procurement, to the Birmingham Municipal Housing Trust, which is the largest local authority house builder in the country, and to what the council's doing to build a strong legacy for the Birmingham Commonwealth Games next year. I think sort of legacy is quite interesting talking about Birmingham, which underwent quite a transformation in the mid to late 1800s under the leadership of Joseph Chamberlain, who municipalised the gas and water works for the people of Birmingham to improve not only the quality of their lives, but to invest in civic works like libraries, swimming baths, shopping boulevards, and buildings like the Council House and the museum. Victorian Birmingham was quite a sort of bigger sort of radicalism from the National Education League, which George Dixon and Chamberlain set up to campaign for non-denominational, non-religious local authority education, to Quakers such as George Cadbury set up Bourneville, a model village for around the Cadbury factory in Bourneville, with a good homes with formal rent, green space and local services. So I bring this up because I think it's important today to understand what steps the council's taking to be true to the legacy of sort of strong civic action in the city, and how it's striving to take Birmingham a greater city for its citizens, and how it's tackling the inequalities we face while also harnessing the exciting opportunities in the city. So to introduce our speakers, we have Brigid Jones, who's the Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council, previously the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, and has been the Councillor for Bournebrook and Selly Park since 2011, though it used to be called Selly Oak, and was previously the Vice President of Education of the University of Birmingham Guild of Students. Sharon Thompson is the Birmingham Cabinet Member for Homes and Neighbourhoods, has been a councillor since 2014. She is also on the Values and Principles Board of the Cooperative Councils Innovation Network, an advisory board member to the Cllr Commission on rough sleeping and COVID. And finally, John Cotton is the Birmingham Cabinet Member for Social Inclusion, Community Safety and Equalities, first elected in 1999. He is also the chair of the Labour Housing Group and the vice chair of the Birmingham Fabian Society. And that, I think we'll start with John.
Thanks, Cameron, and thanks for reminding me just how long I've been on the council now. I think I should point out I was only 12 when I started, honest. But no, really glad that you've organised this evening's event, because I think it's really important that we talk about the work that Labour in local government is doing, and certainly in big cities like Birmingham, very much leading the agenda of change and laying the foundations of what we hope will be a radical Labour government that will be elected in due course. Just to sort of set the scene a little, really, my brief, which also I think is the longest job title in the cabinet by some way, is very much focused on those issues of social justice, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here this evening. And if we think about Birmingham, I think we've very much got a tale of two cities. So there's one city, which is the one you very much see when you walk around the city centre. It's got the cranes in the sky. I mean, it's particularly pre-COVID, where you saw the kind of economic growth that was taking place. We had annual economic growth of 4%, business-based growth of about the same size, both above the national figure. Some great assets as well. We're the youngest city in Europe. We're a super diverse city. We've got 200 different nationalities here in Birmingham. So we've got roots right around the globe. So on one hand, a city of growth and great opportunity. But there's another Birmingham, and you don't have to walk too far away from those cranes and those building sites to find it. It's a Birmingham where 43% of the population are living in the 10% most deprived areas of the UK. It's a Birmingham that has the highest unemployment rate of any local authority. It's a place where the weekly average earnings are £51 below the national average, and are even worse for women. And a place where nearly 20% of workers are paid less than the real living wage of £9.50 an hour. And it's also, and I think most damningly, the place where over 40% of children are growing up below the poverty line. Really stark inequalities, and one's inequalities that are further exacerbated if you happen to be black or from an ethnic minority, a woman, or disabled. And over the last 15 months or so, we've seen what COVID has done. It's intensified those inequalities. But of course, the raw truth is that they're inequalities that have been there all along. And I think they're very much a reflection of a national economic and social model that's fundamentally broken. And also a reflection of what's happened after 10 years of austerity that stripped away much of the good that was done by the last Labour government. Some people know I'm a bit of a fan of Harold Wilson, and he once said that the Labour Party is a moral crusade, or it's nothing. And I think tackling inequalities is very much the moral crusade for Birmingham Labour. It's not a kind of nice extra or an add-on or an afterthought. This is our core mission, so much so that we've actually written it into our council plan, sending a very clear message out to our council managers, to our partner organisations, and to the people of Birmingham that tackling inequality, championing social justice is very much what we're here to do. And we started this in our very first act after we took back control of the council from a Tory Lib Dem coalition 9 years ago. The very first thing that Labour cabinet did was to introduce the real living wage for all council employees. And at a stroke, we lifted 1,700 of our employees out of poverty pay. And then we looked at how we could drive that out through our supply chain. So basically saying, if you're going to come and do business with Birmingham's Labour Council, we expect you to pay the real living wage to the people you employ as well. And then we looked at the council's procurement muscle, the money that we spend buying goods, buying services, commissioning activities. And we looked at how that could be used to deliver social justice, to create jobs and deliver investment into local communities. So in addition to paying the real living wage, we use the business charter that you referred to in your opening remarks. We use that to insist our contractors buy local, that they buy from SMEs in the city, that buy from social enterprises or indeed voluntary organisations. We've been using that to drive out additional social value. So we expect people who contract with us to put something back into the city. And when we weigh up bids that come in, we have a default 20% social value weighting. So we're valuing the social as well as looking at issues of cost and efficiency as well. And that really has delivered some results. Over half of our procurement spend is with businesses that are located in Birmingham, and 4/5 of our spend is actually in the wider West Midlands region. And that meant that last year we spent £194.6 million here in the local economy. It meant that we delivered over 68,000 weeks of local employment. And it meant that also that procurement was delivering vital support to people, things like mobile phone access for homeless and vulnerable people, career support for young people. So we're maximising the bang for our buck that we spend in the city. We're also looking to go further on this with our partner organisations. We've built something called the Birmingham Anchor Network. So that's the council plus 2 of the city's universities, 2 of our major housing providers, 1 of the hospital trusts and the Police and Crime Commissioner. That's a total of £1.3 billion of public money that we spend collectively, and we're working together to keep that in the local economy and invest it in projects that transform lives and opportunities here in the city. So starting to have an impact on those neighbourhoods and those communities that have been excluded from growth and opportunity. Sharon and Brigid will also speak to this as well, I'm sure. Just the frustration that we had, that the first period of our administration in Birmingham in particular was absolutely dominated by the austerity agenda that Cameron, Osborne, Clegg coalition government imposed. We had some tough choices to make. We lost over 60% of our controllable budget. And that meant taking some really tough choices. I think we all had sleepless nights as we faced budget meetings and tried to decide the priorities that we were going to try and keep investing in. And what we always sought to do was keep as much investment in possible in services for the most vulnerable. So that's, you know, our homelessness services, the work that we do with people with disabilities and multiple needs, and the work that's tackle and prevent domestic abuse, amongst other things. I don't think what we did was entirely perfect, but I certainly think that we as a council did a better job than some others. And I think if you see the work that we've done on homelessness, which I know Sharon will go on to talk about, is a really good example of how I think we got the balance right there. We also had to deal with the impact of that so-called reform of the welfare system, which has torn huge holes in the safety net for many people in this city over the last decade. Birmingham in those early days was at the forefront of a partnership approach to try and mitigate the impact of things like the bedroom tax, try and develop a more humane local welfare provision policy, and an approach to council tax support following the abolition of council tax benefit. And we were able to save some key frontline services as well, things like libraries, our in-house and voluntary sector advice services, and develop some new models of prevention in adult social care as well. So at times it has been a bit of a dented shield, but I've always argued that in times like of austerity, a dented shield is certainly better than no shield at all for many people in this city. Now, if we look back over the last year and a half, some very fundamental things have happened. We've touched on COVID. We also saw the global call for justice that was articulated by Black Lives Matter, and a real demand, I think, to ensure that we start to build back from COVID, not just better, but fairer. COVID touched every part of our society, but the blunt truth is it's the poorest in this city who've borne the brunt and paid the highest price. And that's why we have to talk about building back fairer when we look at recovery from COVID. And that's also the truth, I think, that's mobilised movements like Black Lives Matter and the movements that are demanding an end to other injustices affecting gender, sexuality and disability as well. So we've thought as a council afresh about these issues and the role that we can play going forward as Britain's largest local authority. So over the last few months, we've worked with citizens, we worked with activists, we worked with partner organisations to develop something called Everyone's Battle, Everyone's Business, which is an action plan that sets out the next steps in our drive to address economic and social injustice. And there are 3 main areas of focus, which I'll touch on in brief, and perhaps we can pick up some of this in the questions and discussion later. But firstly, we're saying that we as the council need to lead clearly by example as an employer. And that's meant telling ourselves some harsh truths. If you look at the profile of our workforce, we don't look enough like the city that we serve, especially at the most senior management levels. Our cabinet, through political decisions and choices, is gender balanced and does reflect the city's diversity. But if we look at the workforce, 67% of Black and minority ethnic staff are still in operational or frontline roles. And the top table of management is still, frankly, too white and too male. That means that our race pay gap is just under 8% within the organisation, and that sits alongside a gender pay gap that's around 9%. So there's a lot of work that we're now taking forward to change the culture, change our policy and practice in partnership with our staff, our trade unions and our staff diversity networks. You may have seen that we're looking at changing our shortlisting and selection procedures, something that's been described as the Rooney Rule, where we're looking that when we shortlist for posts, we will always ensure as a minimum we have a BAME candidate and a female candidate on each shortlist, and also that the interview panels are similarly balanced. That's not going to be the magic bullet that fixes this, but I think it's a really important step that needs to then be supported by the investment that we're putting into staff development, the mandatory equalities training that we're putting in place, changing our governance to embed an understanding of race and diversity right at the heart of what we do. And one of the roles that I'm fulfilling is leading an Equality Star Chamber, which essentially holds the feet of other cabinet members and senior management to the fire to ensure that we're delivering against the objectives we've set ourselves. And we have said we'll set ourselves publicly to account. We're going to publish those race and gender pay gaps every year, and we've set a target to eradicate the race pay gap and have that representative workforce by 2025. The second piece of work is around how we work with our partners to challenge some of those wider inequalities in the city. So that is taking forward the commitment that we took as a council around the living wage. We want to apply to make Birmingham a living wage city, and we're working with partners, including the business community, to apply for formal recognition from the Living Wage Foundation to do this. And that means that we're putting together an action plan to increase the number of accredited living wage employers in the city by 50% and the number of employees who receive the real living wage in our city to over 100,000. And we're looking at how we can spread better employment practice across the public and private sector through a Birmingham Employment Charter, and of course driving forward more of that work around procurement and social value, particularly developing more diverse supply chains within the city. The other thing we want to do is put the voices of lived experience at the heart of our policy and decision making. So that's why we're sponsoring the second round of initiative that was called the Birmingham Poverty Truth Commission. So basically putting people with lived experience of poverty right at the heart of our decision making, challenging some of our assumptions and some of our mindsets, and ensuring that what we do properly reflects the needs and interests of people right across our city. The third thing that we're looking to do is to tell a really inclusive story about 21st century Birmingham and to celebrate and share the stories of diversity and dynamism that make our city what it is. Now, despite what Robert Jenrick may write in the Daily and Sunday Telegraph from time to time, this is not about woke militants like myself cancelling everything in the city's history. What we are talking about is properly exploring and explaining the history of Birmingham, the bad as well as the good, and how we learn from it. And I think, you know, as we build the Birmingham of the 21st century, we want that city to reflect who we are now, just as the Victorian Birmingham of Chamberlain reflected who they were then. So we want to add new places and spaces to celebrate the stories and the journeys of present generations of Brummies. We want to celebrate the vibrancy and diversity of our history. You know, this is a city that battled for the vote. It's battled for labour rights. It's a city that's very proud to be a city of sanctuary, providing refuge to people from across the globe. So, you know, whether it's the story of people like me, working class lad from Perry Bar, whether it's my neighbour who came here as part of the Windrush generation, my friends who've got roots in India and Pakistan, these are all the stories that I think inspire and motivate the next generation. And for a city that is the youngest city in Europe, I think that's a really important thing to do. So I think despite the challenges that we've faced over the last decade, austerity and a government for whom the concepts of social justice and equality have frankly seemed an anathema at times, I think we've done an awful lot to try and keep that flame of equality and justice burning here in our city. But it's also clear as we look at the post-COVID world and that pattern of injustice that still stymies lives for too many in our city, there's much more for us to do. And that's certainly why this Labour Council won't relent in challenging ourselves and others to deliver the changes that people in our city need. We've got to build back fairer. And doing that is, as we say here in Birmingham, doing that work is everyone's battle and everyone's business. Thanks very much.
I was on mute. I think next we'll move on to Sharon, then we'll go to Brigid at the end.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Cameron. And John, that was great. You've left me and Bridget with nothing to say. No. I think I just want to start off with actually just putting a bit of Birmingham context, I think. We often say as Cabinet and as people in Birmingham that we are the biggest local authority in the UK and in Europe. And I think it's easy to roll that off the tongue, but just to give you an example of what the challenges that will bring and what that means in terms of size, we are the equivalent to 4 to 5 London boroughs. That's how much responsibility there is in Birmingham. That's how much, you know, the scope of thing is. And often people will look at the statistics around us, particularly around things like homelessness, deprivation, and forget the size of the city that we're actually working with and the people that we've got a responsibility of serving. So for a cabinet, I think I always say that we don't just concern ourselves with council services, we concern ourselves with what's best for the local communities and the city that we are here to serve. And that's incredibly important to us. And as a Labour authority, it is incredibly difficult. I'm going to be very honest. It is very difficult trying to do the best for the city when we've got a Tory government that has cut us and decimated our budgets, that make decisions that push people further into poverty in terms of policy. And we have to pick up the pieces. And the most difficult thing is sometimes people in local communities then think it's us as a Labour local authority, when actually we're just trying to make sure that we soften the blow and that we try and do the best for the people within our city. And I think that's part of our challenge and the bit that makes it difficult for us. But we are a responsible cabinet and a responsible city and a responsible local authority. And I'm just going to run through some of the things that we're doing in terms of my portfolio in homes and neighbourhoods and how that fits into the Labour Party wider agenda, I guess. So, you know, we hear a lot about homelessness across the country, and that is on the basis of a broken housing system nationally. And I think we're all key on that, particularly for young people that are looking to get into the housing market. It's very difficult for you to get a home when you're looking at just every inch of housing. There's broken systems and planning laws that are stopping us from doing the things that we would like to do. And one of the things in terms of homelessness, I always say is that when we had the last Labour government, we almost eradicated rough sleeping. And then within 7 years of a Tory government, we managed to increase it by 167%, which is absolutely staggering. But here in Birmingham, we're trying to push back into the principles of that last Labour government. And that is actually trying to get upstream and start to look at prevention, because our actual core aim is to stop people from becoming homeless in the first place, to prevent that, but also support those that are already in crisis. So we've really been brave and we've moved towards that prevention model whilst also dealing with a crisis at the same time. So we have over 3,500 families that are stuck in temporary accommodation because there's not enough move on across the city. We have a desperate need for family housing. Our rough sleeping figures have gone down by over 67% over the last 2 years, which has been really good. And again, that's about the prevention model and the fact that we look at things without the arrogance of we know what's best. We actually have a real collaborative approach across the city, because working with our partners absolutely is key for us as a Labour administration. We know we couldn't do it without the partners, and we know that we're not always best at everything. You have to work to everyone's strengths. And as a city, we have to address those challenges. So one of the things that we've done to try and reduce bed and breakfast is actually we have now transformed a tower block that was due for demolition, which was called Barry Jackson Tower, and that's now a temporary accommodation centre. And that means that we can actually give people the support whilst they're in there, so that when they do get their permanent home, that all the basis box are already in place, that actually their support workers can come and support them on site, rather than sending them and dispersing them across the city to go and get that support, and that their children are safe. We talk about Birmingham being the biggest council house builder in the country, which sounds great. And, you know, we've worked really hard at that. But the other side of it is we still have a huge shortage. So we have a waiting list of over 18,000 people that are on there. But what we're doing with our house building arm is that we are trying to make sure that it hits the fact that it supports the building of properties. So we've got council properties. the government doesn't make it easy for councils to build in the first place. The financial model is also broken. But what we do with our house building arm is that we try to support other bits of the city and how we can help. So with our house building arm, we have a procurement list of local SMEs, so that actually we can actually work with small SMEs for them to do some of the work that takes place on those builds, so that we're actually putting money back into the economy and supporting small businesses. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of when it comes to BMHT is that with every scheme that we build, which is mixed tenure because of the way that the model is, we put money out of that, £500, I think it is per property, that goes into a fund towards young people. And what we've done is we've got a whole scheme, a scholarship scheme. So in this city, we've managed to send young people who wouldn't normally be able to access university, from marginalised communities, whether that's based on gender, whether that's based on ethnicity, family circumstances, who wouldn't normally get to be architects or planners of the city. And what we do with that is we send them to university, and nothing is more heartwarming than knowing that we've helped young people in this city to get first-class honours degrees. And some of them have actually gone on to join the Birmingham City Council graduate schemes. So we've helped to further development, and they've ended up working within the council. And that's what was really important to us, that we wasn't just talking about building homes, but we was contributing towards the lives of people within the city and helping them through that mechanism to get on the ladder and to progress into different careers. The big thing for us in terms of housing stock, we are a council, we are a landlord. We have over 62,000 properties ourselves. And we all saw what happened in London with Grenfell Fire, and that was the most devastating and heart-wrenching thing that I've ever seen when it comes to housing. It was the biggest crisis in housing, full stop. And one of the things that we did was we wasn't waiting for the government to tell us or give us the money. We decided straight away we was actually going to put in sprinklers into our tower blocks. We was going to have a whole programme around fire safety. We worked with the fire service. We actually invested over £51 million across our 213 tower blocks, and we're coming towards the end of that programme this year. For the last 3 years, we've been fighting with the government to help to fund some of that, because they were only interested in funding fire safety around the cladding and poor cladding. They had no interest in everything else that was concerning around fire safety when it comes to tower blocks. But we wanted to prioritise that, and for us, that was a political decision that we needed to take for our tenants and for the safety people within the city. One of the things that you will see with us as a Birmingham Council is that sometimes there are things that sit with outside our domain that we don't have responsibilities for, the legislation don't support us on. And one of those things is exempt accommodation. And I say that and looked in the screen at Brigid's face and also John Cotton's, because we're all working really hard on this. And it's something that's very difficult and very challenging, because we don't have the legislation or the powers to make a difference. But our local communities are absolutely suffering. And one of the things is that these providers are turning family housing into HMOs, into exempt accommodation. Their housing, it's supported housing, so it's supporting the most vulnerable, but some of them are not providing the support that they actually need. And there's a whole host of issues that takes place with that. John Cotton is very busy around the community safety side. Brigid is very busy with the revenues and benefits side, because there's huge challenges around that. And Birmingham spends over £200 million a year on housing benefit on a broken market at the hands of the government. But what have we done to try and solve some of that stuff? We've been working with the front bench, Labour, to give them and tell them our experiences, and they are championing it and actually fighting for legislation change, as are our local MPs. But we also put together what we call a Charter of Rights, and that is about co-production. And again, this is another strength of the Labour administration. We worked with Spring Housing, who worked with over 50 people who have lived through supported housing, and they helped to shape what the charter should look like and how it would support them as individuals, which was so important. We've developed our own quality assurance framework, And we're slowly working through that, and we're one of 5 local authorities that was awarded money for the pilot. So we continue to make sure that we're getting involved with things like that and doing things for the best of the communities. But one big thing that we do as a local Labour administration that I don't think all councils do as much as probably we do, but probably because we've got no choice because we're so big, is the fact that we lobby a lot when it comes to the government. Over the pandemic, we've lobbied non-stop when it comes to homelessness, particularly those with no recourse to public funds. There was a period of time when the government were talking about in COVID, that in my portfolio with bereavement services, that when people passed away from COVID, if it got too overwhelming, that they could determine whether you had a burial or a cremation, which is not good for particular families or people of faith. So we actually fought against that with the National Party, and that was overturned and changed. So we have a big part to play in that, and working with people like Simon and the PCC and our Labour MPs across the city. So that's just a little bit of a snapshot of some of the things that we're doing. And another thing that I did want to talk about in terms of innovation is our dormer bungalows. Now, our dormer bungalows are bungalows for older people that we've built through BMHT. And the whole emphasis of these is that they are interchangeable so that people can live in them for longer. But again, it was about trying to encourage those older people that had big properties, so 3-bedroom property, and there's only them living in it now because their families have moved away. And our emphasis was, let's try and encourage them to join the waiting list, to go into a dormer property once it becomes available, to free up a family house, because we have to find alternative ways to expand the housing market to meet our needs. In 2031, it has been estimated we're going to have a staggering 158,000 people living within the city. And that means in terms of housing, that's nearly 90,000 more properties that we need to be building across the city. So we have to think smartly about how we extend the housing market, and that includes bringing empty properties back into use. And I think I'll end there. Thank you, Cameron.
That's great, Sharon. To round off, we will go to Brigid, then we'll go to questions.
Crikey. I think I've got much left to say. So Sharon and John have given you a really good overview of what Birmingham is, what we're about. So I'm not going to tread back over old ground. What I will dwell on for a moment is that word socialism, because the title of the event is Socialism with Brummie Characteristics. And it's a word that during my time as a councillor, which is a terrifying 10 years now, of which I spent 9 on the cabinet, it's a word that I've heard so many times and has been so hotly contested. And I just want to unpack a little bit. So we came into power in 2012 after 8 years of a Tory Lib Dem administration in Birmingham. Birmingham did it first before it was cool. And we came in as a Labour administration with a mission to turn the city around, focus on inequality and to change lives, because the Labour Party is a democratic socialist party. We believe we achieve more together than we do alone, and we believe that power, wealth and opportunity should be in the hands of the many, not the few. This is the mission we came in with, fresh-faced new councillors in 2012 taking on a new administration and a new challenge and a new city. And as Sharon and John have outlined, we were hit immediately with cuts. Tory cuts that were being imposed on us nationally. Just a word about how councils are funded, because I think it's really important to understand that. So since 2010, we've lost around about £750 million in decreased funding. Council tax at the moment only makes up around about 11–12% of our budget as a council. The council tax that we collect is a tiny percentage of our total spend as a council. When I started, it was around about 7%. Much lower. A huge proportion of our budget comes in grants from central government, and the way that councils are funded is first of all a mess, because council tax is an imperfect tax based on property prices from 1992, when most of you weren't even born, you disgustingly young people, and which makes me sad and very jealous. But most of our income comes from national government, and if they decide to cut that back, we're very much at their mercy. When we came in, we had a choice. We could work with the circumstances we had, and try to improve lives, put our socialist values into practice, or we could walk away. And we chose to stay and work, obviously. But I wanted to dwell on that word socialism for a moment, because for others that call themselves socialists and others that believe that socialism is something different, we have been called by people in our own party, often red Tories, we've been called traitors, we've had our workplace barricaded, we've had our workplace invaded, we've had people coming into our council meetings and screaming in our faces, shame on you. When we've tried to pass budgets, we've had comrades in branch meetings sometimes shouting at us that we don't care about anybody. We've had petitions raised against us. We've had people try to throw us out of the party simply for doing our legally required duty as councillors, for setting a balanced budget. We've been accused ultimately of being anti-socialist. And I wanted to dwell on that for a moment, because Socialism with Brummie Characteristics is, of course, the title of this event. Sharon and John have already given you a raft of things that we have managed to do in power, and I'm about to give you a few more. Socialism isn't about putting up placards and shouting through a megaphone and being the most outraged in the room. It's about changing people's lives. It's about creating a fairer society. It's about believing that together we can achieve more than we do alone. And it's about using those tools at your disposal to bring about the change that we need to see in the world. And despite the adverse circumstances we faced as a Labour Council, we have strived to do this, and we have strived to put some of the most vulnerable in society first. So just to flesh out some of the other things that we've been doing over this period of time. So I used to, as Cameron said, I used to be responsible for children's services in Birmingham, which was fun. Children's centres, one of the flagship projects of the Labour government between 97 and 2010. The budget for those suddenly unring-fenced, hard to protect. We held out for as long as we possibly could to protect those budgets when Tory councils were shutting those down left, right and centre, because we knew that the earlier you get to kids, the earlier you get to families, the earlier you get that help, and the bigger a difference you make for their lives. Education funding is screwed up. The higher your education level, the more funding goes into it. Actually, in terms of your child development, brain development, the younger you get to kids, the bigger the difference you make. We did ultimately have to make some cuts to children's centres, but we did so by prioritising keeping them in the areas that needed them most, reforming the system so that we could keep as many possible as around the city. We actually increased the number of venues that we were delivering services from, so we could get into communities we weren't going to before, and had a model that's actually reaching more kids now than it was before, because we thought differently about it. We understood the value, we targeted it rather than just cutting it back. Children's services, social workers that help some of the most vulnerable kids in society. We inherited a service decimated by the Tories. It had been inadequate for years and years. They'd failed to improve it. And when we came in, we looked at its funding and realised that the funding per kid was about half of what other authorities were putting in. We pumped £37.5 million per year into that service. This was at a time when we were facing cuts, we were facing reduced budgets. It was really difficult to find that money because it meant making sacrifices elsewhere. As John and Sharon have said, there's not one of us that has lost sleepless nights over this. My hair, this is all hair dye. I'm grey. I'm very, very grey from what the last few years has been like. But we made difficult decisions to prioritise things like children's services in order to get that money to the kids that needed it most. When we inherited children school improvement funding from the Tories, the year before I took over education in the city, there were 100 school improvement advisors in Birmingham for 400 schools. Just before I took it over, the Tories cut it down to 8. More than 100 down to 8 school improvement advisors working to improve schools in Birmingham. We've got 400 for them to get around. That was the kind, they hadn't thought ahead. That was the kind of priority that they were pushing on things. We had to work with tricky government policies. Academies were a very hotly contested thing. My big worry about academy policy is it pitched schools against each other. It got them working against each other rather than together. We couldn't stop schools going academy in Birmingham, but we thought around it. And we looked at what we could do. And what we did was we set up something called the Birmingham Education Partnership, a vehicle to keep schools working together in the city, whatever their governance model, whatever type. We wanted to keep that ethos, keep those values in the city. And we've worked with schools forums, we've worked with BEP, we've worked with head teachers to keep schools, no matter whether they're academy or not, keep them working together, keep them focused on the kids of Birmingham, keep them cooperating. And on that word cooperative, actually, we have many schools around the city that have become cooperative schools rather than academy chains, including the nursery school co-op as well, which was one of the first of its kind in Birmingham. In adult social care, we inherited from the Tories one of the worst adult social care services in the country. They just lost a judicial review at the time we came in for attempting to cut services back to the absolute bare minimum. And they'd been legally stopped from doing it by a challenge that was brought to them. It was one of the worst in the country. We were failing older people, we were failing younger people with disabilities. So much work has gone into that, to turn those services around, to get them working better, to transform them into things that are fit for the 21st century, to make sure they work for the people that need them and are responsive to their needs and their aspirations in life. Because people who receive services, they're not just service users, they're people exactly the same as anybody else who have hopes and dreams and things they want to do. And you've got to make services that respond to that and provide what they want to do and give them that dignity and give them that choice rather than just what the council wants to provide them, which is what we've done in the past. And that service is on its way up. I should say as well, the Children's Services investment paid off. We came out of intervention a couple of years ago, thanks to that investment, thanks to the work that we did there. Commonwealth Games is coming to the city. Yay! I'm not the world's biggest sports fan, I will admit. I support Cambridge United. That tells you how much time, time I put into sports. But it's coming to Birmingham, and I'm in it because I want to see Birmingham on every TV screen in the world. We've got an incredible city, we've got incredible people. We need the world to see that. We need them to see what the opportunities are here. That's why we're bringing it to the city, because of the employment opportunities that are coming with it, because of the investment opportunities that are coming with it. For every pound that's put in investment in the Commonwealth Games, we're projecting a £3 return on that in terms of levering investment into the city. Previous games, we've had 75 to 80% of contracts going local. We think we're going to exceed that. Contracts going into West Midlands businesses and pumping that back into the economy to make the games happen. The regeneration that's come off the back of that, don't know if you've been to Perry Bar recently. It's a building site. Thousands of new homes going in there that were desperately needed in the city. Station being regenerated, amazing transport links, a world-class athletic stadium. It's around about £500 million is being leveraged into that bit of Birmingham, where we have many deprived communities, to regenerate it and to bring opportunities to it. There's lots of unexpected things where if you look at the surface, you don't quite realise some of the impacts they have. So an example I'm going to pull out is Centenary Square. We refurbished Centenary Square recently. Looks quite pretty. But actually, it's a really clever trick that we've pulled off here. First of all, the money side of it, the money that we put into refurbishing that square, we're making back significantly more in the business rates that we have raised for the properties around it and in people that we've attracted to the city because of that awesome space, like HSBC, who are, and I think Goldman Sachs are bringing stuff here as well. So we've got, Deutsche Bank even. So we've got big businesses coming in because we're choosing to invest in the things that they're interested in. That then brings them in. It raises the business rates that we can then plough back into our services and the things that matter. It also creates jobs and opportunities for people in the local economy. Things like that have really unexpected benefits that people often don't realise come off the back of it, as well as, I think, democratising that space. And I don't know if you've been to the fountain in Centenary Square recently. Full of kids. It's summer, totally full of kids splashing around and playing in a way that they couldn't previously in that square. It's a big plaything. It's fantastic. Maybe not if you're a parent and your kid's coming back soaked from it, but the kids love it. It's really turned that space around. And a similar thing actually we've done in Victoria Square. We've democratised that space as well. We've filled it full of tables. People can come and sit there for free and enjoy the city centre, opening it up to more people to, have a family picnic or whatever. When I was a kid, we never went anywhere without about a picnic because eating out was expensive. We take a picnic everywhere. You know, families can come there, they can enjoy it, but also you can support local businesses by buying things and taking them to those tables. Little things like that we've been looking for opportunities to do. Transport links, loads of exciting things coming to transport. You know, you are young Fabians, you are young people, you know that one of the most consistent things we get back from young people is transport is such a huge barrier to getting to opportunities. We've got the tram being extended. The next big tram project is to whack it out from the city centre to the airport, in order to connect all those communities in East Birmingham to employment opportunities at both ends. That's why we've picked that route, to connect some of those most deprived communities with the worst transport links to jobs and make them accessible to the young people, well, to all people there. And in East Birmingham, I mean, as Sharon said, Birmingham's bloody big. East Birmingham's the size of Nottingham. In East Birmingham, we have a dedicated project there, taking some of our one of our most deprived bits of the city, actually one of the most deprived bits of the country, and doing a really in-depth look at what we can do holistically to turn some of the stuff around there, invest in it, get skills stuff going, and really make a difference to people's lives there. The clean air zone, 900 people a year die from breathing in dirty air in our city centre that is polluted. We launched that last week, and we're trying to turn that statistic around and basically save lives of people who live, work, go to school in the city centre by cleaning up the air that they are breathing. And then, you know, just finally, during the pandemic, it's been a crazy year. Again, we've made choices. We chose to feed children in the school summer holidays and Christmas holidays when the Tory government wouldn't, and when Tory councils wouldn't. That's a choice we made as a Labour council, to fill the stomachs of our kids, and to keep them fed during the pandemic when families were struggling the most. That's what socialism can achieve in practice. That's what Brummie socialism looks like. My only regret is that the whole time I've served as a councillor, it's been under a Tory government. But wherever you are, whatever your circumstances are, there are things you can do, there are choices you can make, there are people you can prioritise to put socialist values into action. It is a word lots of people want to own socialism, but to me, Brummie socialism, it's not about shouting loudly, it's not about waiting for the perfect society to come along, it's not about waving a placard, it's about taking the values of socialism, and it's about working with the levers that you've got to create the change that the people we are here to serve so desperately need. And I hope tonight we've shown you between us that that is what we have been doing. I'll shut up now.
Thanks, Brigid. So I think from that, you've heard a really sort of practical vision of what a Labour council can do and is doing. And a Labour council that's quite rooted in its communities and understands it and what needs to happen. So before we open to Q&A, I've got a couple of questions. So obviously we had local elections last month. Yeah, last month. Feels ages ago now. Andy Street, Tory mayor, got re-elected. So how do you think having a Conservative mayor, especially Andy Street, is affecting what the Labour Council can do? And how do you think you can ensure that he doesn't take credit for everything that you're doing? Obviously, like the tram's been extended. He'll be all over the tram extension. He'll probably try and take credit for the Commonwealth Games as well. After his was it Australia last time? He took a trip over, didn't he? To visit the last Commonwealth Games, taxpayer expense. Yeah, so how do you think working down the street will affect what the council can do? And looking ahead to next year, what would your sort of elevator pitch be to a voter in Birmingham about why they should re-elect and elect Labour councillors and the Labour Council? Don't mind who wants to take those questions.
Shall I take the one about working with Andy?
Yeah.
So it's one of the tricky things you have to do as a Labour council. You know, we don't have a Labour government, but we still have to work with the government to achieve things. We don't have a Labour mayor, very, very sadly, despite all of our efforts on the doorsteps over the last few months. But we still have to work with him to get things done. He's not the mayor we chose, but he is the one that the West Midlands chose. And he's there. and working against the parties in opposition who are in other tiers of government isn't always the way to achieve things. We oppose them when they're wrong. We oppose them when they're doing things we disagree with. We call them out when they're doing bad things. We call them out when they're doing things that we disagree with. But ultimately, we also need to be working with them because the way that the legislation is set up, the way that combined authority is set up, the way the government is set up means you cannot achieve things without an element of working together. So Andy's in a weird place because most of his power comes from the West Midlands Board. The West Midlands Board is populated with 2 reps from each of the 7 local authorities of the combined authority. So he's a Tory mayor, but 8 of the votes around that table are Labour votes. You've only got 7 votes around that table that are Tory votes. So Labour actually has a majority, weirdly, on the CA board, despite the fact it's a Tory mayor. So we do hold a fair bit of power and veto power over things that he does. So we have stopped him from doing things that we've disagreed with. We've stopped him from bringing in a mayoral precept last year. We stopped him from folding the PCC role and the fire authority into his remit because we thought that was the wrong thing to do. And as a Labour majority on there, we managed to stop him doing it. We do work with him sometimes. You know, during the pandemic, we've been lobbying government behind it. He's got them all in his bloody phone book, hasn't he? So he's been dead. I'm not going to lie, he's been dead handy for being able to ring up ministers and get some back from lobbying in there. But it's about having those mature relationships. You oppose them when they're wrong. You influence them. You nudge them. You push them the right way. You use the powers and the levers you've got to get what you need. But at the end of the day, you do have to respect, no matter how much we disagree with it, the choice the West Midlands made and work alongside him where there are joint agendas where we need to get things done. It's striking that balance.
Yeah, completely agree. And anyone want to go on what their elevator pitch will be to voters next year and why they should re-elect Labour councillors and councillors and why they should re-elect Labour Council?
I'll have a crack at this one. I'm not going to come up with a strap line while we're on this call this evening, but I do think that actually it's in the pitch that we've set out this evening. It is the fact that we have worked to build and continue to build a fairer city. Things like the living wage touch every household, every community potentially. We have protected frontline services that not only the most vulnerable in our city rely on, but also every community. If you think of what we've done around protecting libraries, for instance, the investment that we're now putting into some of the frontline services to ensure that streets remain clean and safe, and of course the big investments that come down the track, things like the Commonwealth Games as well. So I think we've got a really strong record of delivery in some of the toughest circumstances, and I do think that people in this city understand that. If we know that overall that the result of that mayoral election was a disappointing one in the West Midlands, but the Birmingham figures prove that when it came down to it, the people of the city put their votes in the Labour box. So I think we've just got to be very proud and confident and get out on those doorsteps and get those messages across in the run-up to next May.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what John says, and it's also reminding people actually throughout the pandemic, we've seen the Tories make some terrible decisions nationally. And we've had to hold the fort, pick up the pieces and work with local communities in order to make sure that people are protected. If you saw, we all saw what Marcus Rashford did when it came to the free school meals. But Birmingham, we went straight to the budget cabinet and there was no opposition to investing money and supporting people when it comes to children and school dinners. You've seen the eviction ban that's taken place across the country. What you don't really realise is that Birmingham actually did that first before the government even thought about it, as soon as the pandemic hit. So we are thinking about things and supporting people on the front foot. But sometimes it's not just about looking at what we've done as a Labour council. Sometimes it's looking at what the Tories are proposing as an opposition. Every year we sit in budget meetings and I'm absolutely staggered at some of the proposals that they put forward. Brigid and John will know the amount of times every single year we hear them talk about sending young people to boarding schools. And and I'm not even saying that flippantly, that is genuinely one of the things that they put in their proposals. So if you even look at some of the things that they are projecting, you know, we're talking about cleaning the air as quickly and fast as possible for the better of the people of this community, and they just want to line the streets with flowers and hedges as that contribution that won't get us there as quickly as we need to. So it's, you know, we've got the track record, and it's just about telling that story. But again, the final thing I will say, it's not just about us as a Labour council, it's about the Labour movement. And that's the big thing. It's about how we all come together. There is no point us all fighting in public with each other. That is not going to inspire anybody to think that we don't even like each other. So we're going to trust, we don't like each other, but we can be trusted with the country. People don't think like that who are outside the political bubble. So it's really about how we behave as a Labour movement and how we all support, because it's a jigsaw puzzle, and we're all a part of that jigsaw puzzle, and our aim is for the better of the people of this city.
And questions, comments, anyone? Take questions. Any questions?
Cameron, I just had a question.
Oh, Dan, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, no, thanks, Cameron. Thank everyone for coming on. It's really humbling to listen.
Dan, your mic's a bit
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just about.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say thanks, Cameron, for organising the event, and thanks everyone for coming. I was just going to say that it's really humbling to listen to the work. There's a lot of it I wasn't actually fully aware of, so it's really humbling for me to listen to all of the good work that the Labour Council is doing. And one of the questions I wanted to ask was, how do you think Labour can locally effectively communicate its message across the voters that actually Labour does have a positive policy track record? Because I think a lot of people are very disillusioned and dissatisfied with politics. So how can we as a Labour movement in Birmingham effectively communicate to voters actually the policy achievements that we have? Because I think often, I don't know what you think about this, but I think one of the problems with the Labour Party is we're often associated with a bit of pessimism. We're often accused of talking down the country, when actually we've got a local authority here in Birmingham that's doing a lot of great work, and it's really inspirational, and it's actually putting the people first that need to be put first. And you know, Boris Johnson likes to talk about the people's priorities, but actually in Birmingham you're putting those people's priorities first. So how do you think we can effectively communicate to voters in Birmingham that that's the positive policy track record that we've got? Thank you.
So we've got a weird situation in that we're not empowered nationally, but we are locally, which is a tricky one to communicate to people, because most people on the doorstep, they don't see the distinction between national and local government. If you look at the numbers that vote in local government elections, it's around about a third of people if you're lucky, whereas, you know, double or more that will turn out for national government. So the key really is drawing that distinction between that's what your Tory government have done, that's what your Labour Council have done, and show the difference between the two. Because otherwise it's very easy for people to give credit for what you've done as a council to the government, because they see them in charge because they're national. Or equally, it's very easy for the blame to get devolved to us. That was a big trick the Tories have pulled off annoyingly well, devolving the blame for cuts to councils. They've taken the money away and then they blame us for what we cut. So we've got a record. I mean, we've talked tonight about our record. I'm very, very proud of it. It's one we need to be shouting about. But the key to it is not taking for granted that people know the difference between national and local government, and making sure that we're getting the message across in a understandable way for people, if that makes sense. Because otherwise you do run the risk of the Tories getting credit for stuff you've done locally, or you getting the blame for the stuff the Tories have done nationally. It's drawing that distinction between the two tiers of government. Look what we've done locally despite all of that nationally, I think.
think I would just add to what Brigid said is the other thing is just about keeping it simple and keeping it local. I mean, if you look at the messaging that you know the Tories gave out nationally and even Andy Street, very simple messaging. We just need to keep it simple and keep it local. The thing is, we've been in power for a couple of years now, and there are absolute cast iron examples in local communities of where we've built things, where we've made a difference, and we need to be telling that story at a really local level.
And I think the other thing is, it is just incumbent on us as the kind of political leadership in Birmingham to be equipping party activists with the kind of the facts and ammunition that they need on the doorsteps. And we certainly, you know, putting a bit of thought into how we do that, ensuring that we get information out to constituencies and branches. I think, you know, sharpening up the kind of strap lines and attack lines that you need out on the doorstep as well, which is something I think we're doing in a more systematic way than we've done previously, which is really important. And I do think we have struggled a bit with this in the past. I think it's a combination of the reasons that the way the party tends to operate, like you said, Daniel. And I think there's also a bit of just Brummie reticence here, that we always seem a little bit embarrassed about talking about our achievements, which is probably why we've got this ongoing rivalry with Manchester, who are always very bolshy about it. And I think we need to get a bit the same way down here.
Yeah, right. Questions, Ed and then David.
Yeah, no, thank you. Can I just start by saying thank you for doing all that you've been doing over the years for Birmingham. It's really appreciated. Just following on from the previous question, when was the last time, or do we know, in terms of local and regional polling being carried out to focus our sort of political messaging? So we're focusing on addressing the anxieties and concerns of the electorate. So we're campaigning basically on issues that are relevant and reflective of the communities we wish to represent. This is not a criticism, because, you know, I'm a councillor in Coventry, and we do tend to do this, where too often we've picked out our own sort of personal policy interest and then tried to shoehorn them into election pledges. So it's just trying to make, basically, by doing, whether it's regional or local polling, we actually know what the key issues are of the electorate, and therefore we devise our political messaging around the concerns of the electorate, not concerns that we think that they have. Thank you.
I'll just kick off firstly on that bit, but I'll just say that, you know, I've been a councillor in Birmingham since 2014. And my experience in Birmingham is that we've always tried to do that with the live data that we've got. And I say that because there's been times when, I mean, if I look at the last time we stood, because we have all up elections, 2018 was the last time we were elected as a local authority. And there was things in the manifesto, such as, you know, a digital autopsy device. Now anybody would say, why on earth did you do that? Why do you need to put that into a manifesto? Well, actually, local communities were telling us that they didn't want invasive you know, post-mortems, and it was absolutely a big thing for them in certain communities in terms of religious wise. So we do try our best to try and look at the issues, and I think we're getting better. I think we're a lot better at looking at some of the data, and because we are in power, you know, we are all close to our portfolio, so we really talk on a regular basis about what the real issues are, and making sure that as a cabinet that we're also working quite well and have campaign meetings with the rest of the Labour group, so that everyone's issues start to flow through. So I think we're quite clear on some of the big things. I mean, if you'd said to me 3 years ago that we would have been having a big issue on exempt accommodation, I wouldn't even have, you know, I wouldn't have thought that would have been the case. But yet, because of what local people are telling us and driving us, and actually COVID has done something very different for us as administration, is that we're all online. I tell you, I've never toured this city so much in my slippers as I have over the last 12 to 18 months. And we've really been listening. We've been doing CLP meetings, branch meetings, ward meetings, you name it. We've been all over the place on Zoom. So we've been able to listen a lot more to what local communities have told us. And the one thing the pandemic has done has demanded that we listen in a very different way.
Because I have tremendous respect for the young Fabians, I'm actually wearing shoes this evening. I just thought I'd point that out. But
Got
I
pajama
think
bottoms on now.
don't tell them that. So I think that that use of data is really important. Something that I think we've got a lot sharper at, and we do have access to the kind of official data that comes through the council's resident survey and various other means of engagement. But I think the other side of this is just ensuring that we absolutely remain rooted as elected members in the communities that we serve and represent. So that is about, you know, holding the ward forum meetings, being out on the doorsteps and having those conversations. Because I think there's always a danger, particularly if you're kind of in what you might call high office, that you can get sort of pulled into the officer view of the world, and everything is dependent on the kind of official channels. And there's no more valuable corrective to that than, you know, going out on the doorsteps on a Saturday morning. And I always used to apply the Flaxley Road test, which is, if I can't explain something on Flaxley Road to somebody on a doorstep there, we probably shouldn't be doing it. And that's, I think, a very good sort of rule of thumb. The other thing has been just with some of the areas of policy taken forward, ensuring that we're consulting and engaging as effectively as we can. So with everyone's battle, everyone's business, what we did with that was kind of put out as general statements of intent with some of the things that we thought we should do, but we then went out to a wider public consultation, which unfortunately then coincided with the 2 lockdowns. But using online and other means, we still managed to get something like 4,000 responses back to that, which I think also proves that the genuine public support and interest there was for dealing with these issues of inequality. But it's something that we've always got to hold ourselves to a very high standard on, in terms of how we engage and that we're listening and responding all the time.
Brigid, anything to add before I move on?
I think it's all been covered.
Yeah. Right, David.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone, for doing this tonight. It's been really interesting. It's just picking up on something a few of you spoke about over the elections last month and the time before then. I'm just wondering, from your experience of campaigning all over the city, why do you think Liam Byrne lost when Simon Foster won?
I can give that one a go. So we need to ask ourselves, as well as why did Liam lose, is why did Andy win?
Yeah.
And he is an incredibly popular person amongst all types of political stripe, I found. I was really shocked the first time he stood for office, back in whenever it was, against Sean Simon anyway.
2017.
Yeah. And I was really struck by even how many people in our own party were going, oh, I quite like him. Oh, he's quite independent. It was quite striking. He doesn't run as a Tory. He runs on a sort of independent kind of brand. John Lewis pops up more in his literature than the word Tory. You know, it's all green, isn't it? It's all pitched in that way. It's all popular things. And he has built up for himself that sort of independent, I'm not a Tory brand, which a lot of people buy into who might not otherwise normally vote Tory. He's well known, you know, he's been in the post for 4 years now. And he's got the whole John Lewis thing behind him. So whether or not we like it, an awful lot of people and I was watching the second preferences at the counts and where they went on different things. His second preferences were coming from all over the shop. People think the Green swings Labour, but you know, Green second preferences at the count were going Tory as much as they were Labour, and weirdly to the anti-lockdown Reform Party as well. But we'll park that for now. But he picks up a coalition of support. He runs on the independent brand, and that's a really hard thing to beat, or a really hard thing to push back against. So. Yeah, and we didn't select a candidate till crazy late as well, which probably didn't help matters. By the time Liam was selected, we only had about a month before lockdown hit to actually do much face-to-face stuff, and not much time to get that off the ground. Money as well, they outspent us 10-1, didn't they? Putting out literature. So I think that's a raft of reasons that happened. I think also, let's name it, there's probably a bit of racism in there as well. We had a Sikh candidate for running for Tory mayor, And I do think that that will, people explicitly said it to me on the doorstep more than once as well, that's why they were voting for Simon rather than the other guy. It's not pretty, but we've got to name it, and that an element of that would have crept into it as well.
I think there's a lot of evidence of vote splitting as well, from what I hear, and that is what it is. And so I don't think it's worth dwelling too much on why Liam lost and why Simon won. We've got to think about the next election now and next year and build on that, and hopefully work to dislodge Andy Street every day from now on, and to show that Labour can be competent and trusted, and sort of build that profile and select early and do all the work early, and not leave to the last minute. Right.
And I think it's also just important emphasising what I said earlier, that even in the teeth of some very bad national headwinds, and in the teeth of a very expensive finance campaign on the part of the Tories, in Birmingham, Labour still won. So the experience of seeing Labour in office, I hope, is a reflection of that, and the fact that gives us a base on which we can build as we go into the May 2022 elections. Now, that's not an argument for complacency, but I think it's just, we need to reflect that what happened was a factor that there were wider regional and national things at play there. But certainly in Birmingham, people, when it came down to it, overwhelmingly put their faith in Labour.
Right. And do you want to ask your question?
There we go. Hello, thanks for that. I'd just like to thank all the panel. It's great to see everybody again after such a long time we've been forced to be apart. Thank you, Cameron, for facilitating this. Back onto the theme of socialism with Brummie characteristics. Speaking from a council in a different city in the West Midlands, if the panel had to describe what their signature policy is as a team, or what they think perhaps what they're most proud of, what at this point, looking back, would they go for? What says Labour in power in the West Midlands most to you?
I think I would slightly add to that as well, as I've asked, I had a very similar question in mind about what sort of one policy, let's say if you're writing the next Labour manifesto, would you want the Labour Party nationally to take on and to adapt for a national setting, for national rollout?
I think for me, it's the living wage. As I say, it was the first thing that we did when we came into office. And I think it was absolutely the signature policy that says that we are about tackling poverty pay and we are about fairness and equality. And I certainly think that, an incoming Labour government needs to look very seriously at the legislating to bring the real living wage into effect right across this country. The growth of in-work poverty over the last decade or so is one of the most damning indictments of where we are as a society and an economy. So that for me, I think is the key signature policy.
Sharon, then Brigid.
It's a difficult one because we've done a lot. But I think I'd probably agree with John around the living wage, but also in terms of the fact, we do build council houses, and I would say that because it's my portfolio, but we do build council houses, and everybody has the right to a decent home. So I would definitely say it would be around building more truly affordable housing across the country, and that they need to sort out some of the planning regulations nationally that hamper councils from building more social housing.
I'll go for childcare. So one of the major reasons for the gender pay gap and women being held back in the workplace is that we are the ones that have children. We don't have proper maternity rights. You don't get paid for your last 3 months of maternity pay under statutory maternity pay. So we don't have proper maternity rights and provision, and we don't have proper childcare for the years before your kids start school, or even actually when you start school. And women bear the brunt of, because we're the ones that have the babies, we then bear the brunt of the childcare, because of crappy gender stereotypes. and we end up being the ones held back in our careers and held back in poverty by the lack of childcare. So that's what I put in, and it's the win-win, because it's great for women's equality, but it's also for great for child development as well, because we know that kids who get that early years education, as I said earlier, get that extra boost before school, get that extra start in life, and that is better for everyone.
Right, I will take a last round of questions. It's 8:20. Dan, do you have another question?
Yes, yeah, I just wanted to ask about sort of the competitiveness of Birmingham's economy and the economic base that we've got. I know that we've still got some SMEs that are engaged in manufacturing, but we have suffered deindustrialisation certainly since 1970s and 80s, and I think we suffered it at a later stage because of the decline of the automotive industry compared to a lot of other areas of the country. So how do you think that we can keep our economy competitive and ensure that we've got a diverse economic base where we're not just reliant on the services sector? Thank you.
Oh, Ed, you've got another question you want to go in there as well?
Yeah, thanks. It was just to follow up around the polling. Do we do any political polling? Because I know what in terms of the responses that's been provided, I think it was sort of the local authority sort of polling. Do we do any political polling so we get our messaging, not just here in Birmingham, but across the wider region? Because I do pick up on the point that John mentioned, you know, that we did well in Birmingham in terms of stacking up Labour votes, but we didn't stack up enough Labour votes in Birmingham for Liam to win. And therefore, it does sort of beg the question in terms of what we're doing across the wider region so we can win back in places like Wolverhampton, Sandwell, because, you know, for the first time, we've started to lose seats in those areas, and nobody's really acknowledging that or addressing those issues. And if we aren't learning the lessons of why we're losing, or people aren't even prepared to discuss that, the danger is, you know, we'll suffer further losses next year. And I just think we need to have a plan agreed across the region and have those discussions, because, you know, I've been around the party long enough, and we have to be honest with one another. We're not having those discussions. Regional board does not function. You know, picking up on the point that Brigid raised, that the candidate Liam Byrne was put in very much at the last minute, and we need to be putting in those candidates sort of within the next year, because if you don't, Andy Street will have another Cllr run for the next 2-3 years, and we'll be still in exactly the same situation where we'll still find ourselves with the Tory government, and we'll just be going around in circles. So that's the reason for me being on this call, is just to sort of instigate these conversations across the wider region, because if not, you know, mathematically, there's no way we're going to win the next general election, and it's now talking about how we're going to win in 10 years from now. And I think that's what we need to start doing. Sorry, I'll shut up. Thank you.
Right, who wants to take those questions, or any sort of closing comments as well?
Just to respond on Ed's point, and I think they are really important and pertinent ones. And I think if we're absolutely honest with ourselves, our level of regional organisation has been far from optimal over the last few years for a whole set of reasons. And I think we do have to do some serious rethinking around how we're organised, and also how we get proper, decent political intelligence and information to understand some of the shifts that are taking place within the region. Part of the problem with polling, I think, particularly at regional level, is it costs a shed load of cash to do good polling. So as we are the less resourced of the two political parties, there's a question about how we go about doing that. And of course, we've always had to rely perhaps more on the shoe leather and doorstep approach to gathering that kind of intelligence. But it does need to happen, because you're quite right, unless we understand some of those trends and how we start to address them, we are going to continue to experience the problems that we saw in May. I'm not going to go too much in depth on the economy question, because I suspect that Brigid will have something to say on this as well. But I certainly think that there is an important role here around what we're doing in terms of our procurement spend, not just as the council, but as that alliance of other public sector organisations to ensure that we're investing locally and that we're creating meaningful job opportunities locally as well. And we've certainly seen with the work that we've done for the Birmingham Anchor Network, approaches that do that and start to unlock opportunities, particularly for those neighbourhoods and communities where unemployment has been highest, where there's been substantial skill gaps and people have essentially been excluded from the economy. So as we rebuild and remodel the economy, that has to be part of the approach, in addition to attracting in, you know, the major external investment that's transformed the skyline and everything else in central Birmingham over the last few years. So I think we've got to get that kind of balance right, because, you know, you're quite right in the impacts of the decline of manufacturing. You certainly look at what's happened in East Birmingham, where whole communities that were reliant on that form of employment have seen that wither away, and the social consequences have been enormous. And that's what we're now left with trying to fix through the inclusive growth strategy and other approaches.
Shall I have a go at the economy?
Yeah.
So first of all, over the pandemic, we've been working to try and keep it alive. So we had a lot of really scary cliff edges, actually, where the government was bringing in extra restrictions in Birmingham, but with no support for businesses that would be affected or closed by it. And we had to do a lot of lobbying with other cities as well to make government put the money behind it, to keep those jobs going, to keep things like furlough going. There was one insane moment back in September, I think it was, where the government, without any warning, almost shut down hospitality overnight with no support, no warning to us. We've been talking to them all week. They hadn't put that on the table at all. And we had to do some really last minute, over about 3 hours, we just had to call in favours and lobby the hell out of them and get them to realise that they just could not do this. They couldn't shut down that industry and affect all those people and affect all those businesses with no support. So over the last year that we've been doing huge amounts just to try and keep what we've got going. One of our big problems in the city is the skills gap. So we have a very underqualified population compared to other places. Part of that is, as John said, we had lots of people who used to work in lower skilled industries that have disappeared now. We've also got a lot of people who have simply left school without the qualifications needed, or have because we're a very international city, they've come here from abroad, but they don't have recognised qualifications. They don't have qualifications that our businesses need. So closing that skills gap and upskilling the population is a huge thing to moving our economy forward. We've got the West Midlands has an industrial strategy built around our key strengths and looking at growing them. So our creative sector, interestingly, not something people always recognise as being a big one in the city. The creative sector is a massive one. But it's hidden because it's loads of micro businesses that operate often out of people's homes and laptops and things, rather than a big shiny building that you can see. But that's a huge part of our economy. Part of our strategy is helping that to grow. Life sciences is one where we're, through things like the LEP, CA, we're levering in money to create more opportunities there. That's going to be a massive growing sector in Birmingham going forward. But we're also very, very lucky as we come out of the pandemic. We've got the stimulus of the Commonwealth Games coming. That is bringing jobs that other cities don't have. It is bringing opportunities that other cities won't have. It's bringing procurement that other cities won't have. So we've got that as a sort of unique stimulus coming to Birmingham. And we've also got coming down the line High Speed 2. I know it's controversial, but for our economy, it could not be more vital. We have businesses that have relocated here because that is coming. We've got people who have bought jobs here because that is coming. And transport is so key to unlocking opportunities. High Speed 2 isn't just about getting to London faster. It's about connecting to the north of the country faster as well, making that accessible and connecting to all of those opportunities. But it's also about taking those London trains off the main line and freeing up space for more local services. It's about reconnecting places that have their stations shut down. It's about running decent commuter lines out of stations that currently the London train just whizzes through. It's about creating green ways and quick ways for people to get to jobs, to get around their region that just don't exist at the moment. If we can move those trains off the line, that's the hidden benefit of High Speed 2 as well. So there's lots to look forward to on the horizon, lots of hope there, I think, again, because of choices we've made, choices we've decided as a council to bring the Commonwealth Games here. We decided to get behind High Speed 2 and lobby for that to come here. We decided to lobby for the technical college attached to High Speed 2 to come here. These are all decisions that we've taken to support businesses in our city, and therefore to support the people in the city, which is what we've got to carry on doing with whatever the hell COVID throws at us over the next few months.
Any closing comments before we sort of say goodbye, because it's 8:30? No, I think we are done. Thank you all for coming. It's really, really interesting, because I think we learned a lot about what Birmingham's doing, but I'm looking forward to the local elections next year. If you can, get out and do some door knocking in Birmingham, some campaigning, because it's not a foregone conclusion yet, and we need to really start building up momentum now and getting the work in over the next year and sort of gaining the ground we've lost during COVID over the past year. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and good night.
Thank you, Cameron. Thanks for organising it.
Cheers.
Thanks. Good to see you all.
Good to see you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye.